So this week, I wanted to shine a spotlight on two opinion pieces that were published in the New York Times, both of which offer the Democratic Party establishment perhaps the worst advice I've ever seen. So one of them is an article by Steven Rattner, who argues that Medicare for all will actually, quote, sink Democrats, and the other is by Douglas Schoen, who argues that the Democrats actually need Wall Street, contrary to popular belief. Now, I don't even have to read you anything more than the titles of these articles in order for you to grasp just how nonsensical and idiotic they both are, because what they're basically telling the party is to completely abandon what their own base wants and do only what their donors want. I mean, that's a recipe for disaster, and if Democrats do this, they will be even less popular than they are now. But let's go ahead and hear them out anyway. So we'll go to Mr. Rattner's argument about how Medicare for all is actually bad for the party. So he argues Mr. Sanders, who of course isn't even a registered Democrat, well of course, is banging on about what he calls Medicare for all, a government-run plan that would provide health care coverage for every American. But now, the crusty Vermont independent wants to be a senatorial Pied Piper for Democrats. He has made his proposal into a kind of litmus test for who is a good Democrat, inveigling 16 of his colleagues, more than a third of Senate Democrats, into endorsing it. A goodly number of those senators are presidential hopefuls, leaving their prospective campaigns open to attack from Republicans salivating to capitalize on an idea that has historically been a political graveyard. Remember Hillary Care? As a centrist Democrat, I'm scared to see my party pulled into positions that are both bad politics and dubious policy, and I'm disappointed that a few of our party's moderates are willing to resist the freight train that's coming at us from the left. But the Sanders approach didn't work for George McGovern in 1972 or Michael Dukakis in 1988, and I don't believe it will work for Democrats in 2018 or 2020. Yes, recent polls seem to indicate rising support for single payer, but when factors like whether taxes would be raised or the Affordable Care Act would be repealed or introduced, the consensus swings to opposition. Okay, first of all, I can't not address just how unprofessional it is for a New York Times journalist, the supposedly most prestigious outlet in the country, to refer to the most popular politician in the country as crusty. What kind of shit is that? Unbelievable. Now, everything that he's saying here, he's using arguments against Bernie Sanders as though this is the 1970s. Well, you know, Bernie's plan didn't work for George McGovern. It didn't work for Michael Dukakis. In other words, hey, all of you voting age people who have no idea who any of these people are, I know that you want Medicare for all, but it didn't work in the past, so we shouldn't try it again, even though a majority of the country wants it, even though a plurality of Republicans want it. We shouldn't try that because it's dubious policy. Never mind the fact that it works really well in Canada. But, you know, even though other countries have it, it's still dubious policy because I say so. And he says here, as a centrist Democrat, you know, I'm scared to see my party shift to the left. Well, I hate to tell you this, but you're not a centrist. You are a right-winger, because when we have an Overton window in this country that is skewed so far to the right, if you're a centrist in the Democratic Party, you're just a right-winger. I'm sorry. Now, he at least acknowledges that recent polls indicate rising support for single payer, but then he talks about how, well, you know, people don't want to see the Affordable Care Act repealed. If currently Americans do only support single payer if the Affordable Care Act will remain in place, then all we have to do is explain to them why the Affordable Care Act will no longer be needed. That doesn't even make sense as an argument. So I've got really bad news for this author. The year is 2017. We have a whole new generation now that is eligible to vote that doesn't even know who Michael Dukakis is or George McGovern is. Times change. Times do change. And if you honestly think that Republicans are going to have the edge, because he said they're salivating over Democrats wanting to endorse Medicare for all, then you're just as idiotic as the Republicans who think that, because times have changed. Voters are on our side on this issue. We've monopolized the debate on this issue, but I don't want to spend too much time on his argument because I want to get to Douglas Schoen's, who tells us exactly why Democrats need to continue being sold out to Wall Street. He says Democrats should keep ties with Wall Street for several reasons. The first is an ugly fact of politics: money. Maintaining ties to Wall Street makes economic sense for Democrats and keeps their coffers full. A second reason Democrats should keep ties with Wall Street, despite being what the Democratic left says, America is a center-right, pro-capitalist nation. A January Gallup poll found that moderates and conservatives make up almost 70% of the country, while only 25% of voters identify as liberal. Even in May of 2016, when Senator Sanders made redistribution a central part of his platform, Gallup found that only about 35% of Americans had a positive image of socialism, compared with 60% with a positive view of capitalism. Third, it is hypocritical for Democrats to maintain ties to Silicon Valley and then turn their backs on the very people who help finance its work. The financial industry brings to market the world's most innovative products and platforms that expand the economy and create jobs. Fourth, demonizing Wall Street does nothing to bridge the widening gaps in our country. Wall Street has its flaws and abuses, which were addressed in part by the Dodd-Frank financial reform law. And yes, the American people are certainly hostile to and suspicious of Wall Street, but using this suspicion and hostility as the organizing principles for a major political party will consign Democrats to permanent minority status. Well, how could that possibly be the case when they're already beholden to Wall Street? Can you name a Democrat that was more sold out to Wall Street in recent years than Hillary Clinton? She raised more money than Donald Trump, and guess what? She still lost. It's almost as if being a corporate sellout and being a Wall Street shill is bad for your electoral chances if you're a Democrat. I mean, I can't even comprehend how deluded you have to be to think that a Democrat's ties to Wall Street is somehow a strength. And he talks about, well, there's just the practical fact of the matter, that money is needed for elections. Yeah, but if you choose to reject corporate donations, well, Bernie Sanders showed us what happens. Then the people will see that you really represent them and you'll raise money through grassroots methods. But if someone is a sellout like Hillary Clinton, why would we donate our hard-earned cash to her if we know she's not even going to represent us because she already took millions from Wall Street? Why would we do that? See why that's not a good idea? Now, he also cites polls that validate his argument, like polls from Gallup and whatnot. But here's the thing about these types of polls. When you talk about Bernie Sanders and you cite polls about how we disapprove of socialism, that doesn't actually prove your point, because when you look at the policies, what Bernie Sanders and progressives are fighting for, they're all majoritarian policies. They have a majority of support among the public. So regardless, if Americans may be symbolically conservative, well, operationally speaking, policy-wise, they're liberal. The polls show that. Hence why a majority of us actually think that money in politics is a bad thing. Hence why a majority of us want Medicare for all, tuition-free public colleges and universities, why a majority of us want to raise the minimum wage. It's because operationally, we are liberal as a country. So I could cite just as many polls showing how Americans are on our side when it comes to policy to blow your poll out of the water. And I love how he talks about the American people are hostile to Wall Street. I wonder why. It's almost as if they crashed the economy in 2008. Why would we not be angry about that? Are you not angry about that? I'm pretty angry about that. And Dodd-Frank did not sufficiently rein them in. It didn't. And furthermore, once it was passed, it already was subpar, but over the years, it was watered down more and more by attacks on it from Republicans. Is it better than nothing? Sure, I guess. I'll take that over nothing. But it didn't sufficiently rein them in. They are still running amok. They are still buying and controlling politicians and doing exactly what they want. So I don't understand how journalists who are published in the most prestigious news outlet in the country, that's not my opinion certainly, but how they can be so idiotic in the claims that they make. I mean, these are arguments that are easily debunked. They're citing misleading polls to contribute to their narrative. I mean, the way that they are spreading propaganda on behalf of special interests, I mean, you're giving Fox News a run for their money when it comes to propaganda and whatnot. So I couldn't not talk about these two insane opinion pieces. Here's my opinion. New York Times, if you really want to claim to be America's most trusted news source and the most prestigious news outlet in the country, don't publish garbage like this. I mean, the New York Times has some really great geopolitical reports about foreign policy. They have great reports about, other countries. But when you publish stuff like this, it just brings down the legitimacy of the New York Times. I mean, if the Democrats took these guys' advice, they would never win again. And they claim that they have to take their advice in order to be electorally viable again. It's the opposite. With friends like these giving you bad advice, I mean, you might as well not have any friends. It's like if you were an alcoholic and everyone in your social circle told you that you needed to drink even more. Well, obviously, that's not what you need to do. That's not the correct course of action. You have to correct the problems, not add to the problems that you already have.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.